The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 12. Yahweh spoke to Moses. He said, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say, Woman conceives and gives birth to a boy. She is to be unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly periods. On the 8th day, the child's foreskin must be circumcised, and she must wait another 33 days for her blood to be purified. She must not touch anything consecrated, nor go to the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. If she gives birth to a girl, she is to be unclean for 2 weeks, as during her monthly periods, and she must wait another 66 days for her blood to be purified. When the period of her purification is over, for either boy or girl, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb 1 year old for a holocaust, and a young pigeon or turtle dove as a sacrifice for sin. The priest is to offer this before Yahweh, perform the rite of atonement over her, and she will be purified from her flow of blood. Such is the law concerning a woman who gives birth to either a boy or a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for the holocaust and the other for the sacrifice for sin. The priest is to perform the rite of atonement over her, and she will be purified. The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 13. Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "If a swelling or scab or shiny spot appears on a man's skin, a case of leprosy of the skin is to be suspected. The man must be taken to Aaron the priest or to one of the priests who are his sons. The priest must examine the disease of the skin. If the hair on the deceased part has turned white, or if the disease bites into the skin, then it is indeed a case of leprosy. And after examination the priest must declare the man unclean. But if there is a shiny spot on the skin without any visible depression of the skin, and without whitening of the hair, the priest is to isolate the sick person for 7 days. On the 7th day he must examine him, and if he sees with his own eyes that the disease persists through without spreading over the skin, he is to isolate him for a further 7 days, and examine him again on the 7th. If he finds that the diseased part is no longer shiny and has not spread over the skin, then the priest is to declare the man clean. It is a scab merely. Having washed his clothing, he will be clean. But if the scab spreads over the skin after the sick person has been examined by the priest and declared clean, then he must present himself again to the priest. After examining him and certifying the spread of the scab over the skin, the priest must declare him unclean. It is leprosy. When a leprous disease strikes a man, he must be taken to the priest, who must examine him. And if he finds on the skin a whitish swelling, with whitening of the hair, and an ulcer forming, then it is a chronic leprosy in the skin, and the priest must declare him unclean. He is not to isolate him. He is unclean beyond doubt. But if the leprosy spreads all through the skin, if it covers him entirely from head to foot, so as the priest can see, then the priest must examine the sick person, and if he finds that the leprosy covers his whole body, declare the sick person clean. Since it is all become white, he is clean. But as soon as an ulcer appears on him, he will be unclean. After examining the ulcer, the priest is to declare him unclean. The ulcer is unclean. It is leprous. But if the ulcer becomes white again, the man must go to the priest. The priest must examine him, and if he finds that the disease has turned white, he is to declare the sick person clean. He is clean. When a boil appears on a man's skin, which, after healing, leaves in its place a whitish swelling, or a shiny spot of reddish white, the man must show himself to the priest. The priest must examine him, and if he finds a visible depression in the skin and a whitening of the hair, he is to declare him unclean. It is a case of leprosy that has broken out in a boil. But if on examination the priest finds neither white hair nor depression of the skin, but a fading of the affected part, he is to isolate the sick person for 7 days. If the disease has indeed spread over the skin, he must declare him unclean. It is a case of leprosy. But if the shiny spot is still restricted and has not spread, then it is the scar of a boil, and the priest is to declare the man clean. If someone has had a burn, and on the burn an ulcer forms, a shiny spot reddish white or whitish in color, then the priest must examine it. If he finds a whitening of the hair, or a visible depression of the mark on the skin, this means that leprosy has broken out in the burn. The priest is to declare the man unclean. It is a case of leprosy. If, on the other hand, the priest on examination does not find white hair on the mark or depression of the skin, but a fading of the mark, then the priest is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day he must examine him. And if the disease has spread on the skin, he must declare him unclean. It is a case of leprosy. If the mark is still restricted and has not spread over the skin, but has faded instead, this means that it is only a swelling due to the burn. The priest is to declare the man clean. It is merely a burn scar. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head or skin or chin, the priest must examine this sore, and if he finds a depression visible in the skin, with the hair on it yellow and thin, he must declare the sick person unclean. It is tinea, that is to say, leprosy of the head or chin. If on examining the case of tinea, the priest finds no visible depression in the skin, nor yellow hair, he is to isolate the person so affected for 7 days. He must examine the infected part on the 7th day, and if he finds that the tinea has not spread, that the hair on it is not yellow, and that there is no visible depression in the skin, the sick person will shave his hair, all except the part affected with tinea, and the priest is to isolate him again for 7 days. He must examine the infected part on the 7th day, and if he finds that it has not spread over the skin, and that there is no visible depression of the skin, the priest is to declare the sick person clean. After washing his clothes, he will be clean. But if, after purification, the tinea does spread over the skin, the priest must examine him. If he finds that the tinea has indeed spread over the skin, this means that the sick person is unclean, and there is no need to verify whether the hair is yellow. Whereas if, so far as he can see, the tinea is arrested and dark hair is beginning to grow on it, this means that the sick person is cured. He is clean, and the priest is to declare him clean. If shiny spots break out on the skin of a man or woman, and if these spots are white, the priest must examine them. If he finds that these patches are of a dull white, it is a rash that has broken out on the skin. The sick person is clean. If a man loses the hair of his scalp, this is baldness of the scalp, but the man is clean. If he loses his hair off the front of his head, this is baldness of the forehead, but the man is clean. If, however, a reddish-white sore appears on scalp or forehead, this means that leprosy has broken out on the man's scalp or forehead. The priest must examine it, and if he finds a reddish-white swelling on the scalp or forehead of the same appearance as leprosy of the skin, this means that the man is leprous. He is unclean. The priest must declare him unclean. He is suffering from leprosy of the head. A man infected with leprosy must wear his clothing torn and his hair disordered. He must shield his upper lip and cry, "Unclean! Unclean!" As long as the disease lasts, he must be unclean, and therefore he must live apart. He must live outside the camp. When a piece of clothing is infected with leprous, woolen or linen clothing, linen or woolen fabric or covering, leather or leatherwork, and if this clothing, fabric, covering, leather or leatherwork appears greenish or reddish, it is a case of leprosy, to be shown to the priest. The priest must examine the infection and isolate the object for 7 days. If on the 7th day he observes that the infection has spread on the garment, fabric, covering, leather or leatherwork, whatever it may be, it is a case of contagious leprosy, and the object is unclean. He will burn this clothing, fabric, linen or woolen covering, leather article of any kind, on which the infection has appeared, for it is a contagious leprosy, which must be destroyed by fire. But if on examination the priest finds that the infection has not spread on the clothing, fabric, covering, or leather object, whatever it may be, he is to order the infected article to be washed, and is to isolate it again for a period of 7 days. After the cleansing, he must examine the infected, and if he finds that there is no change in its appearance, even though it has not spread, the article is unclean. It must be destroyed by fire. It is infected through and through. But if on examination the priest finds that the infection has diminished after washing, he is to cut it out of the clothing, leather, fabric, or covering. But if the infected reappears on the same clothing, fabric, covering, or leather article, whatever it may be, this means that the infection is active, and you must destroy by fire whatever is infected. The clothing, fabric, covering, or leather article, whatever it may be, from which the infection disappears after washing, it is to be clean after it has been washed a second time. Such is the law for a case of leprosy in a linen or woolen garment, of fabric or covering, or leather article, whatever it may be, when it is a question of declaring them clean or unclean. The Jerusalem Bible, 2 Kings 4:42 through 5:19. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God bread from the first fruits, 20 barley loaves, and fresh grain in the ear. "Give it to the people to eat," Elisha said. But his servant replied, "How can I serve this to 100 men?" "Give it to the people to eat," he insisted. "For Yahweh says this, they will eat and have some left over." He served them. They ate and had some left over, as Yahweh had said. Chapter 5. Naaman, army commander to the king of Aram, was a man who enjoyed his master's respect and favor, since through him Yahweh had granted victory to the Arameans. But the man was a leper. Now on one of their raids, the Arameans had carried off from the land of Israel a little girl who had become a servant of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would approach the prophet of Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went and told his master. "This and this," he reported, "is what the girl from the land of Israel said." "Go by all means," said the king of Aram. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 festal robes. He presented the letter to the king of Israel. It read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, for you to cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his garments. "Am I a god to give death and life?" he said, "that he sends a man to me and asks me to cure him of his leprosy? Listen to this, and take note of it, and see how he intends to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his garments, he sent word to the king, "Why did you tear your garments? Let him come to me, and he will find there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his team and chariot and drew up at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent him a messenger to say, "Go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will become clean once more." But Naaman was indignant and went off, saying, "Here I was thinking he would be sure to come out to me and stand there and call in the name of Yahweh his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprous part. Surely Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, are better than any water in Israel. Could I not bathe in them and become clean?" And he turned round and went off in a rage. But his servants approached him and said, "My father, if the prophet had asked you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? All the more reason, then, when he says to you, 'Bathe, and you will become clean.'" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, as Elisha had told him to do, and his flesh became clean once more, like the flesh of a little child. Returning to Elisha with his whole escort, he went in and stood before him. "Now I know," he said, "there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now, please accept a present from your servant." But Elisha replied, "As Yahweh lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing." Naaman pressed him to accept, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "Since your answer is no, allow your servant to be given as much earth as 2 mules may carry, because your servant will no longer offer holocaust or sacrifice to any god except Yahweh. Only, and may Yahweh forgive your servant, when my master goes to the temple of Rimmon to worship there, he leans on my arm, and I bow down in that temple of Rimmon when he does. May Yahweh forgive your servant this act." "Go in peace," Elijah answered. The Jerusalem Bible, Matthew 8, 1-4. After he had come down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. A leper now came up and bowed low in front of him. "Sir," he said, "if you want to, you can cure me." Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "Of course I want to. Be cured." And his leprosy was cured at once. Then Jesus said to him, "Mind you do not tell anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest, and make the offering prescribed by Moses as evidence for them."